You clicked for a reason. You're here because you heard whispers of a moment when the unimaginable happened. A moment when a seasoned politician known for his impenetrable facade was blindsided on live television, revealing something about his private life no one ever thought would see the light of day. This isn't just about politics, it's about a raw, unscripted confrontation that shattered composure and exposed secrets. What you're about to hear is the story behind that viral headline, "Caught on Camera, You Won't Believe What Jasmine Crockett Revealed About Trump's Private Life." The sterile, yet imposing, room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building hummed with an almost electric tension. Sunlight barely penetrated the high windows, reflecting off the dozens of camera lenses fixed on the witness table. Cable news banners, already a blazing red, flashed across screens mounted in the press section. It was a Monday morning in late September, and the nation's eyes were fixed on Washington, sensing, perhaps subconsciously, that this day would be anything but routine. This wasn't just any hearing. The President of the United States, serving his second term, was about to testify in a highly publicized congressional hearing, ostensibly to defend his most divisive executive order yet. A packed room, overflowing with journalists, congressional aides, and curious onlookers, held its breath, though few could have predicted the seismic shift that was about to occur. At the far end of the row of representatives, a figure of calm, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat with a pen resting against her chin. She didn't look nervous. If anything, she looked patiently expectant, as if already privy to the script of an unfolding drama. Her burnt orange blazer stood out against the drab backdrop, her expression unreadable, unwavering, even as aides whispered around her and staffers rushed to finalize last-minute details. A hush fell, the collective murmurs of the room dissipating into a low thrum of anticipation. Then President Trump walked in, 10 minutes late, surrounded by a phalanx of Secret Service agents and a trail of tense-looking advisors. His expression at first glance was his usual hardened mask, yet as the cameras zoomed in, the telltale details became apparent. The slight puff under his eyes, the subtle clench of his jaw, the almost rushed way he moved toward the witness table. These subtle nuances didn't go unnoticed by the keen observers in the room. The committee chair called the hearing to order, and the president offered a practiced smile promising to clear some things up. For a moment, the atmosphere remained deceptively calm, the undercurrents of tension almost imperceptible. Now, as the initial pleasantries fade, get ready to witness the calculated calm before the storm, where a seemingly ordinary exchange begins to unravel into something far more revealing. The hearing began with what appeared to be standard policy talk, legal language, predictable rebuttals, and the president's familiar deflections, designed to redirect and produce sound bites that would play well on certain networks by dinner time. The room settled into a predictable rhythm of political theater, a routine that lulled many into a false sense of security. But Representative Jasmine Crockett, sitting patiently, was observing, waiting for her precise moment. She remained composed, her strategic approach unseen by most, as she watched the initial exchanges unfold. When the chair finally called her name, there was a subtle shift in the air. She adjusted the microphone slowly, deliberately, and began to speak without looking at her notes, her voice clear and resonant. Her initial questions, though seemingly focused on policy and the executive order, carried a different weight. She asked about security, not just for the American people, but for whom that security truly benefited, probing the deeper implications of his directives. When the president offered his usual dismissive retort, calling her questions recycled nonsense, a flicker of tension crossed his face, a minor crack in his otherwise hardened composure. It was a subtle signal that the narrative was about to deviate from his carefully managed script. A brief, almost imperceptible pause hung in the air after her pointed remark about results not coming at the expense of the truth. That moment, just a breath, was enough for everyone in the room to feel that something profound had shifted. Crockett didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She allowed the silence to linger, an uncomfortable vacuum, before leaning in slightly, her calm unwavering, and declared that it was time to be honest about the true agenda of the day. And what began as a mere shift in questioning is about to explode as the focus of the hearing moves from policy to something deeply personal, revealing a secret that would shake the very foundation of the president's public image. The president's deflection hung in the air, a familiar attempt to brush aside inconvenient truths. But this time, something was different. Representative Crockett's gaze remained unwavering, her voice steady as she subtly shifted the focus. She was no longer just talking about policy. She was talking about the very fabric of integrity, the sincerity behind the president's public image. It was a calculated pivot, an almost imperceptible turn that, for those watching closely, signaled the true nature of the confrontation was about to begin. She then deliberately reached down, pulling out a manila folder from her stack of papers, not with a flourish, but with a quiet, decisive motion. This wasn't information leaked from opponents, she clarified, but rather internal emails exchanged, she emphasized, from within your own team, your own aides. The sudden appearance of such a document sourced directly from within his inner circle instantly raised the stakes, transforming a political debate into something far more personal and exposing. Then, with an almost surgical precision, she unleashed the first bombshell, direct questions about the First Lady's prolonged absence from the White House, the existence of separate residences, and discrepancies found in Secret Service logs. The details were specific, undeniable, and aimed squarely at the image of a unified, stable household that the president so meticulously projected. Trump's initial reaction was a dismissive scoff, an attempt to wave it off as a stunt or Real Housewives of Washington. But his body language betrayed him. The subtle clench of his jaw, the rapid blink of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as it rested on the table, all spoke volumes. He was agitated, uncomfortable, and for the first time, visibly on the defensive, the first true crack appearing in his carefully constructed facade. What started as a crack is about to become a fissure as the Congresswoman relentlessly pushes deeper, exposing even more intimate details that will send shockwaves through the hearing room and across the nation. With the first crack exposed, Representative Crockett didn't let up. Her voice, still calm, yet now infused with an undeniable force, pressed the point that if the president's core is fractured behind the scenes, if his own household was built on illusion, then how could the nation truly trust his governance? It was a logical, inescapable leap from the personal to the political, and it forced him to confront the disquieting truth of his public image. Then came the cutting line, delivered with devastating precision. "I know what your staff is saying behind your back." This wasn't speculation, it was a direct accusation of internal betrayal, hinting at disloyalty from within his own ranks, and that did it. The president snapped. He slammed his palm on the table, a sharp, flat pop echoing through the room, his face flushing crimson, his voice rising in an uncontrolled shout. The shock in the room was palpable, a collective gasp from the press and gallery as the thin veneer of presidential composure finally shattered. Yet Crockett, unperturbed by the outburst, simply continued, moving on to even more sensitive ground. Allegations of his increasing reliance on private medical attendants during trips, hushed mentions of presidential garment concerns from his aides. The air became thick with unspoken meaning, and then the ultimate humiliating reveal. She brought up personal garments not for fashion but for function, subtly referencing an unspecified accident that led to a term whispered only among intimates: diapers. It was a moment of such profound, unexpected personal exposure that it instantly became the peak of the humiliation, driving the president to a complete, visible loss of control. Throughout his meltdown, the shouting, the denials, the desperate attempts to regain authority, Crockett remained a pillar of unwavering calm, her quiet composure amplifying the raw, unhinged nature of his public unraveling, fully delivering on the title's promise. The raw footage from this explosive confrontation immediately ignited a firestorm, sending shockwaves far beyond the hearing room itself. A profound silence descended upon room 2141. It was the kind of quiet that burns, even through the television screens and live streams, a silence so thick you could practically feel it. No coughs, no camera clicks, just the palpable tension. The president, who had weathered dozens of heated hearings and press confrontations throughout his career, was now visibly shaken. His hands twitched, his lips pressed into a flat red line, and his eyes darted between the cameras and the committee members, desperate to regain an inch of the control he had so spectacularly lost. He continued to mumble, his voice hoarse, words barely catching the microphone, then snapped again, unleashing a volley of insults, calling the congresswoman disgusting, a fraud, an angry little woman. In a desperate, final attempt to assert his authority, he tried to stand, signaling an intention to storm out. But the chair, Representative Arden, was already flipping furiously through the procedural binder, struggling to maintain order. The chair's firm, if strained insistence on the president's obligation to answer questions added another layer of humiliation. The raw, unfiltered frustration on the president's face as he was effectively forced back into his seat, unable to walk out, underscored the complete loss of his usual dominance. He was no longer in control of the room. The narrative had been irrevocably seized, and through it all, Congresswoman Crockett remained a pillar of unyielding calm, her composure only serving to amplify the raw, unhinged nature of his public unraveling. Now, as the immediate shock settled within the hearing room, the true explosion was just beginning, reverberating across the nation and exploding across every digital platform. The moment the hearing footage hit the internet, it ignited. It was instantaneous, a wildfire of clips, memes, and hashtags that spread with breathtaking speed. Social media platforms, from TikTok to Twitter, became a torrent of the president's shattered composure and the congresswoman's unwavering calm. Cable news networks, from CNN to MSNBC and even Fox News, were forced to grapple with the raw footage, unable to ignore the undeniable visual evidence of the meltdown. Political pundits and commentators dissected every frame, every strained expression, every sharp retort. Experts weighed in on body language, while legal scholars debated the implications of the exposed internal emails and private life revelations. But it wasn't just the political class reacting. The nation itself was captivated. Teachers, parents, and everyday Americans shared and discussed the clips, praising Congresswoman Crockett's composure and truth-telling, while expressing a mix of shock and schadenfreude at the president's visible struggle. In response, the president's Truth Social accounts erupted with furious defensive posts, but the impact felt different this time. The usual fire and fury seemed to bounce off a public that had just witnessed something far more visceral than any tweet. Meanwhile, Congresswoman Crockett, with a strategist's precision, followed up the viral moment with dignified, calm media appearances. She continued to reinforce her message: when you speak with facts, you don't need to yell. Her collected demeanor, in contrast to his continued erratic behavior, only served to highlight her strategic mastery, solidifying her as a formidable force in the public eye and turning a single hearing into a national phenomenon. But the story wasn't over. While the public devoured the viral clips, a quiet panic was setting in within the highest echelons of power.